Everybody ready? Going once, twice?
Yep.
Good morning and welcome back again for our second Monday in a row. I'm joined here by our DA, Dan Dow, and we're here today to inform you of an arrest and a homicide that occurred back in July, and that is the homicide of our victim here, Primitivo. Before I kind of discuss the details, I was just going to recap. This is our sixth homicide of the year, which is highly unusual. We started with our first homicide of the year on January 24th, and that was the Boss case down in Oceano, followed by March the 3rd, the Carrington Brossard and her unborn baby up in the Nacimiento Lake area. Then the April 3rd of this year was Daniel Fuentes. That's the one we discussed last week, where we arrested the Gray brothers and Nathan Norjara, excuse me. And then June 1st of this year, Christopher Wilson was stabbed to death up in Shandon, and that suspect's in custody. And then today marks the most recent homicide from July 7th. So a little bit of background. On July 7th, deputies received a report of a subject deceased along the roadway on Estrella Road in rural Paso Robles. When deputies arrived, they found Mr. Ortega laying face down, deceased. He had suffered numerous stab wounds, and over the course of the next 7 weeks, we began the investigation. When we located Mr. Ortega, he had no identification on him and nothing that would tell us who he was or where he lived, so that was our first challenge with the case. The detectives utilized a fingerprint system to be able to eventually identify the victim in the case, and through a series of very intense follow-up interviews and forensic analysis, we were able to determine who was responsible for killing the victim, and he was identified as a 28-year-old Fausto Ortega Maldonado here. Now, you can probably see they share a similar last name, but they're completely unrelated. So the suspect was already in custody on an unrelated charge, and on Friday evening we added the additional charge of murder, and he was booked. The suspect in the case is a convicted felon. He has a prior felony conviction for domestic violence. This is not gang related, and it has no connection to the last week's reported arrest in the Fuentes homicide. I'll open it up to questions now if you have any questions. Yes.
Do you have a potential motive in this case?
We do, but we can't discuss it at this point. That would be up to the district attorney to discuss, because the case has been turned over to them. Did
the suspect know the victim prior to this incident?
Yes.
What is the relationship?
I think I'm limited to say that they knew each other, but no family relationship at this point.
Where did the crime occur? Did it occur where the body was found or elsewhere?
I think we have information to believe that it occurred either en route to that location or at the scene.
And how were sheriff's deputies able to identify the suspect in this case? What evidence suggests it's him?
Well, largely due to a lot of interviews. This was a very difficult case because there was an extreme language barrier. And so we had to have interpreters go with us. What we found early on was there was a lot of people that were not truthful about even information about who they were. So a lot of it had to do with the interviews, physical evidence at the scene, and electronic information.
Are both citizens of the United States?
The suspect is not. The suspect actually has, the reason why I brought up the prior conviction, that the suspect actually has a prior felony conviction that qualifies under Senate Bill 54, the sanctuary state. So we did communicate with ICE. He is wanted by ICE. He has been deported before, and the information we have at this point is he's in the country illegally.
Did Mr. Ortega live in Paso Robles, in the Paso Robles area as well?
We actually never really found his residence address. He moves around for employment, as I understand it.
What was his employment then that he moved around for?
I think I'm going to have to call upon some help on that. Ag.
Why did it take so long for deputies to identify it as a homicide, going from a suspicious death to a homicide?
We didn't have a problem identifying it as a homicide. We call it a suspicious death for a couple reasons. One, putting out information when we don't even know who the victim is, and or potentially damaging the investigation at that point. So it was put out as a suspicious death, which it was, but it was a homicide.
Any drugs or alcohol to be a factor in this case?
Not that we know of.
Are you at liberty to tell who found the body or how the body became discovered?
I believe a passerby saw the body driving on Estrella Road. It was right alongside the road.
There were reports that an altercation might have happened at a nearby bar. Can you confirm any of that information?
I don't have any information on that. I'm not aware of that. As you were aware, I'll just add, as you're aware, this happens from time to time, a body dump, and this was more what it was. They tend to be very difficult because a lot of times they're coming from out of the area, the victim or the suspect, and they're actually just transported and dropped in our county, and that was similar to the case, except we believed it occurred in our county.
And do you know how long Ortega's body was there before it was discovered?
I think it was determined to be less than 24 or 48 hours is our determination.
Just a quick question. What was the biggest challenge of this case?
I would probably say the interpretation, simply because everybody connected to this case were not English speakers, and they were speaking a dialect of Spanish language that made it even more difficult, and so we had to employ people that could interpret for us, which is always difficult when you're interviewing witnesses and even suspect.
Was Maldonado a suspect in the case when he was first booked in July 2018, or excuse me, July 18th?
Yes.
He was a suspect at that time?
He was a suspect. I'll just elaborate just a little bit. He was a suspect, and as you know from the prior case that we discussed last week, the 3 arrests, we still have to develop the case, and so getting having a person in custody helps us because we simply know that then the community's safe. But until we reach a point that we can file the charges with the district attorney's office, we really do our background and work.
Dan, could you speak to the charges filed and expected sentence outcomes?
Well, first of all, I just want to commend the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff and his investigative staff did amazing work with a very, very challenging case, especially considering the multitude of homicides that we've had in the county over the last 18 months. Their work has been outstanding. In terms of what we're going to be filing today before 3 o'clock, my office is preparing a criminal complaint charging Mr. Maldonado with a 1 count of Penal Code 187 homicide. We're pleading it generically. We'll see what the evidence produces at the preliminary hearing in terms of his potential premeditation and deliberation. We're also adding a charge for an enhancement for the fact that he used a deadly weapon, to wit a knife. That's Penal Code Section 12022B. If he was convicted of first-degree murder, it would be a 25-year to life sentence plus 1 year for the enhancement. If he's convicted of a second-degree murder, it would be 15 years to life plus 1 year. So at this time, we'll wait and see whether or not it develops into a first-degree or a second-degree murder. And we are asking as well that he be held without bail. Any other questions regarding that?
I'll just add something. I said it last Monday, how proud I was of our investigative team. When you hear the number of homicides that we have had this year, and which is highly unusual for us, we're normally at anywhere from 0 to 3 a year. But to have this many, and if you took it back 6 months before this, we had the Wistrom homicide that occurred up in rural Paso Robles, Shannon area. They've been extremely busy, and the amount of work that goes into solving this, particularly on a body dump, has been they've been essentially working around the clock to make this happen. Okay, if there's no further questions, thank you for attending.